Welcome to the Progressing Lives Everywhere podcast, brought to you by the Amoria Bond Group. In each episode, we feature prominent business leaders and industry experts sharing their personal experiences and inspiring anecdotes of what progression means to them and insights into their specialist fields, as well as tools, techniques, and practical steps we can all take to progress lives everywhere.
Hi, I'm Natasha Crump, ESG Director for the Amoria Bond Group. Joining me today is Gary Elden, OBE for Services to Diversity in Business. Gary is the former CEO of S3 plc, a FTSE-listed specialist recruitment company, one of the largest in Europe with a multi-billion pound turnover and employing around 3,000 people worldwide. Gary worked his way up at S3 from trainee recruiter, experiencing a variety of roles in his journey to CEO, including founding S3 brand Huxley and Group Chief Strategy Officer. In his 6 years as S3 CEO, Gary doubled both turnover and profitability. Gary is now chairperson of RecBid, a disruptive tech startup, and here at Amoria Bond, an international recruitment specialist and staffing consultancy in advanced engineering and technology. Beyond the boardroom, in 2015, Gary was awarded Business Person of the Year at the Black British Business Awards, an award going to inspirational role models who can encourage the next generation of business achievers. He's also a trustee for the Alito Foundation, a non-profit supporting people from disadvantaged backgrounds to help them fulfil their potential as the future leaders of tomorrow. And in 2020, Gary founded the Diversity and Inclusion Charter, an independent initiative aimed at encouraging companies and individuals to hold themselves accountable by publicly pledging what actions they'll take to make positive, real-world change and make diverse, inclusive and equal workplaces a reality. So Gary, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Natasha. That was a mouthful. Well done.
Got through it. Gary, it's your passion in diversity and inclusion that we're really going to focus on today. But I'd like to start by first understanding a bit more about your own personal progression. So what does progression mean to you?
Wow. That's a tough first question. I suppose progression for me is trying to improve yourself mentally, physically, as you get older, and make sure that I think you push yourself beyond your safety net and try and achieve more out of life. I think we have a very short period of time on this earth, and we need to try and make the most of it. And if I don't believe in an afterlife, so progressing to me is making sure that everything I do, I feel like I'm challenging myself. Since leaving recruitment, I'm involved in a lot of tech startup type companies, and I'm learning new skills and learning to adapt to different situations. And even at the ripe old age of 53, to me, it's about right for the next 7 years. What can I do that's going to make me feel challenged and progress and evolve? And to me, that's what progression is, right? It's just evolving and developing and growing as a person.
So that concept of continuous improvement, continuously kind of like working towards something else, is that a model that you've applied throughout your career? Because kind of looking back, trainee to CEO was quite the journey. Was it always part of a master plan?
Yeah, I've always been ambitious, always. I was never satisfied. I was, being brought up in a council estate. I always thought, right, why can't I have a house? And then if you get a nice car, why can't I have a better car? If you're earning X, why can't I earn X plus Y? So I don't know why. I think it was always in me that I wanted to have more. Initially, it was for materialistic reasons. But even I suppose in a competitive environment like sports at school, we're always pushing to win and do better. So I don't know. I think from a very young age, I think it was always in me. I don't know, is it nature or nurture? I just felt that that there's why don't you push yourself and see what you can achieve? And so that's always been I've always been driven in that way.
So you talk about ambition and a clear drive and determination to succeed. Did you also kind of plan your next steps? Have you always kind of got within the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years? Have you always kind of got that modelled out to a certain extent in front of you?
No, I think my view was, if you're the best at what you're doing, then the opportunities will come. So I've always had, and that's what I've always loved about sales, right? And before I got into sales, or 2 jobs before, I was in insurance broking, and that philosophy of if you're the best at what you do, you will succeed. I didn't think applied there. It's who you knew, rather than what you did. And so I worked out after 4 years, maybe I'm a bit slow in working that out. I worked out after 4 years, it wasn't a meritocratic environment. So I always felt if I got into sales and I'm successful at sales, then the opportunities will come, and that's how I looked at it. Right, be the best, and then things will happen. And luckily, I've been in an environment where I was able to do that. So I think you've got to be in the right environment to achieve that, but always push to be the best. And if you are the best, then I do think things will happen.
That's interesting. You talk about environment, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. But in terms of being the best, for anyone kind of at the start of their career or kind of hungry for the next kind of move, and with that same ambition that you talked about you having, what does being the best look like? What were the attributes that made you the best?
Yeah, look, I've said this many a time, right? Academically, I wasn't the brightest. I wasn't the most natural salesperson, to be honest. I came into an environment where I left a state agency where I was one of the youngest managers. After 2 years in a state agency, I was managing more than one office. Then I got into recruitment, and I was like, whoa, this is a different league of salespeople. And they were academically brighter than me. They were I think they were better at sales than me. And the only thing I could do to close the gap, and I've said this so many times, was to work harder than them. And then once you start working harder and you get what you're doing, then you can just be as smart as them. And I can't be as smart academically, but I can be smarter in relation to knowing the job. And in my view, the more you practice, the more mistakes you make. I always work on it's a numbers game, right? And if you work out that if you keep making mistakes and then you don't learn from that mistake, then you're not going to develop. But I made more phone calls than anybody else. I worked longer hours than everybody else. I sent out more CVs than everybody else. And guess what? I got more offers than everybody else. I got more deals than everybody else. You make more money than everybody else, right? So that was a very simplistic way of achieving in sales. Is that if you're surrounded by people and you think, how am I going to beat them? Then if I'm doing exactly what they're doing, I'm not gonna beat them. So what I did is I used to go around and speak to the most successful people in the business and say, how do you do that? And what would you do in that situation? And then you pick up that knowledge and you say, okay, I'll put that bit there and that bit there and use a bit of my own magic, put it together, and then you have your own formula. And I think that's to me is how you become better. I didn't sit there and and hang out with the wrong type of people. And there's a term we used to use back in the day. It's called mood hoovers. They always complain, oh, life's not fair. Oh, it's because of my color, or it's because of this, or it's because of that. And look, in some cases that may be the case, but you can either sit back and gripe and growl about it, or you can try and do something about it. So I never hung around with the mood hoovers, right? I'd hang around with the inspirational people and learn from them and gain as much knowledge as I can from them, and then hopefully evolve and do better. So to me, it's about working harder, but then people do miss this bit, but it's also working smarter as well.
That's really interesting. So that hard work ethic, but also you mentioned something there that's quite important, and I think it's quite telling in terms of some of the things that you've spent your time investing in later in your career. And that's about proactively surrounding yourself by the best, by people who, for whatever reason, in whatever area of work you're doing, inspired you? So kind of almost self-selecting role models and mentors through your career. Is that a fair kind of summary?
Yeah, look, if I look at the people that help me become successful, there are from different walks of life. I had an odd bunch of people at Huxley when I started Huxley. People would look at my team and go, "Wow, they're odd." But I like people from different backgrounds. Right? I'd have people from middle class backgrounds, working class backgrounds, Jewish, Indian. It didn't bother me. Right, Manchester. It's its own thing, right? So I can think of the people that I had around me, but they all had something to add, right? And I was never that sort of person who had that hierarchy where they couldn't speak their mind, right? The one thing that I had at Huxley, which was the first brand that I developed within S3, is that we loved being different, but we loved the fact that when we had our board meetings, it was fun, right? We'd challenge each other, and we'd banter with each other, but we're also serious about it. But I'd have a business that did banking in a certain way. I'd have a business that did engineering in a certain way. I had a business that did IT in a certain way. We'd have a perm business. We'd have a contract business. But the one thing we all had is that we had the common goal of trying to be the best, the most successful brand within S3. So surrounding myself with a different array of people, I loved that because I find it more exciting, right? You know, people got a different perspective on things and a different attitude, and I love being challenged, and I think that was always important to me. And I think in order to be successful, you surround yourself with people that you think are going to be better at you in certain things. And I think I was good at just pulling that all together. I'm very good at delegating.
It's a good skill to have. I think lots of us would like to be better at delegating than we are. Just coming back to that point, you talk about liking to surround yourself by lots of different types of people. You talk to a lot about kind of that hunger and that passion for learning from different people. You've had great success through your career. How important do you think actually having that diversity around you that you're naturally drawn to, how much of a factor do you think that has actually been in the success of the businesses you've worked in?
Look, I don't think it was diverse enough. If I think back, it's if you look at the percentage of males in senior roles and whites, I suppose white males. But I think diverse to me is not just the color of your skin. It's making sure it's obviously gender, but it's also your social backgrounds as well. So some people might come from a middle class background and went to private school, but have the same drive as someone who came from a working class background and lived on a council estate. And so to me, it's the person that I try and try and think right, we've got a meritocratic environment. The right person will get the job, and I believed in that for so long. But then when we looked at the data and the stats and looked at the management team that I had, then it didn't add up. So something was missing, right? It wasn't as diverse as I'd liked it to have been, and to this day, you still look back and go, "Why was that? Why was that?" And sometimes the environment you create is sometimes what you're as a team are comfortable in. So if you're into sports and you're sitting around a table and you're talking about football or rugby or cricket or whatever, and someone's not into sports and that's all you're talking about, or you're talking about going down the pub and having drinks, but someone's doesn't drink, you think you've got but you're actually creating an environment where we have certain types of people. So although you strive to be a diverse environment, unconsciously you're actually talking about issues and things that is isolating certain people who then when you get feedback from them, go, "Do you feel you're part of it?" They say no. It's like there's an in crowd that I'm not in, and therefore you find people move and go into leave because they don't feel they're part of that sort of group. So although I'd like to say, yeah, it was really diverse, I had this, I had that. If I look back, yes, it was diverse to some degree, but I could have done a lot more if I think about it. So and it's not until we did surveys and questionnaires and everything else, then you realize, we do have a problem. And I think you need to address that, right? But sometimes in your own head, you think everything's fine, right? I'm not racist. I'm not sexist. I'm not this. One I used to hear got guys saying, "Well, how can I be sexist, right? I've got a wife and a mother, I wouldn't discriminate against someone coming in, but the environment you create means women don't want to come in." So I think it's important. You've got to, I think, as you become older and wiser, look at the data, and if the data or the stats in your company doesn't look as equal as you think it should be, then you maybe need to look at it. You look at there's a problem. There's a root cause to the problem.
Nice, honest response there, Gary. You talked there about the importance of surveys and stats in terms of actually kind of taking the blinkers off and helping to kind of help you to understand that more needs to be done. Maybe you weren't as diverse as an organisation as you'd maybe thought you were. There are still quite a lot of naysayers around, stats. You don't need stats, you don't need surveys. It's just, it's all about creating, an open, welcoming environment. Why is it, do you think, that actually, yes, you need to create the environment, but why are those numbers so important in kind of advancing and turning the dial?
I just think a lot of companies are in denial, and because they generally have, well, I'm not racist, I'm not sexist, I don't discriminate, and therefore they think it's the only. Therefore, when I take person on, I take it on merit. And I think deep down, they do believe that, right? And they're not just consciously going out there going, "Oh, I'm taking you on because you're white and you're a male." They're not sitting there doing that. But the problem is that sometimes the way you ask questions, the environment that they're in, the interview process. I look back now and what we used to do. You go, geez, a certain type of person wouldn't want to come to this company. If it's a very laddish culture, and sometimes the women have to act like men to succeed, and they can't be themselves. So I think we're just not aware of it. Okay, and I think we need to educate ourselves, and then we need to develop ourselves, and we need external people to make us aware of it. It was not until you get people who you consider professionals in this area that come into your business and say, "Let's look at your culture. What do you think about your culture?" Our culture is great. It's a meritocratic environment. Look, I'm from an ethnic minority background. I've succeeded, but I'm an exception to the rule, right? And therefore, you can't base everything on one black person or one woman or one gay person, right? You've got to base it on the data, right? And so, if your environment, if you don't think you're doing anything wrong, then you've got a reluctance to change. And until you accept that there's an issue, until you start looking at yourself and start thinking of and people call it unconscious bias, right? But as we become more and more educated, right, I think it's becoming conscious bias. But until you start addressing yourself and saying, hold on, but I don't think so. I think sometimes you need an external guidance and advice to bring you to get that moment where you go, okay, I've heard it enough now. And if I've heard it from enough people, then something must be wrong.
It's interesting you talk about kind of denial and whether it's conscious or unconscious bias. I think there's certainly, from my perspective, still real lack of awareness amongst many of us, particularly those of us who've never experienced racism personally, that racism is still an issue. I often hear now, racism is an American issue. It's not, there's no place for racism in modern Britain. All sorts, those kind of things that, it's not a problem anymore here. It's not a British problem. It's a thing of the past. I know from speaking to you and from hearing you speaking to other people that you've had your own experience of racism and bias. And I'd just be interested to understand from you, for those people who don't think that this is an issue anymore, it's not something that we need to be talking about, the conversation should move on. What are the ways, Gary, that you've experienced racism, and how does racism and discrimination still show up today for Black people in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a deep question. So my wife, who's white and from Croydon, had the similar sort of attitude. What are you on about racism? I've not seen it, and it wasn't until we started to go to um, clubs. We'd try and turn up at the door, and she'd be on her phone, and then I'll try and go in first, and it'd be like, "Sorry, sir, it's members only." I'm like, "What do you mean it's members?" I'm in a suit and everything, and then she'll rock up and go and just walk straight in, right? So we did an experiment once, and it's crazy. I've got a friend who's very dark. He's black and very dark. So he'd walk up to the door, right, and say, "Right, yeah, I'm coming for a drink." They say, "Sorry, sir, members only." Um, and he's in a suit, right? Then I turn up, and they'd ask me questions. Say, "Look, who you here with?" Blah blah blah. But they'd eventually let me in. And then a white friend of us would turn up, and he'll just go straight in. So people might go, "Oh, that this happens all the time." And unfortunately, when you live in a sort of certain bubble, right, and in a certain environment, you don't experience it. I used to get stopped all the time when I lived in Blackheath. I used to run a Caribbean takeaway. Every time I'd drop the chef home, every single night, more or less, I used to get stopped all the time. And it's like, geez, this is crazy. So when you tell people that, now since I've lived in Chelsea, I've moved out to outside of Guildford, I've never been stopped ever, right? So you don't experience it until maybe you live in a certain environment or a certain area, right? So I've never experienced any form of racism that I've seen at the schools that my kids go to, which is predominantly white schools, right? Although one of my daughters is about similar complexion to me. She got one little kid told her about, "Oh, my mummy says that black people aren't good at ballet," and she came back like, "What does she mean by black people are not good at ballet? And why was she talking to me? Because she didn't see color." And then we had to explain to her, what it was all about. And for the first time at the age of 9, she started to be aware of her color being slightly darker than everyone else. So there are little things that happen that most people are unaware of. But when you are different, or you're in a situation, it does really sort of hit you, right? And so my youngest daughter, who's darker than my eldest daughter, who blonde hair and white, is more aware of it already at 9 than my eldest daughter. Why is that? So I've not installed that on her. We don't talk about race because we didn't feel we needed to. But you can see already that she's growing up more aware. She wants to know about George Floyd, what happened there, and what's racism mean, Dad, and she's more aware of it and asks questions about it more than my other daughter. So I just think that there is little things that you come across and you notice that as a white person sometimes you miss, or as a female, right, you capture that, you sense things that men don't. My wife told me all the time, like, "What you've just said there is inappropriate." I'm like, "Really?" And then she challenges me, and I go, I see it. So unless you start listening to someone who's different from you, and so if you are in that privileged environment, you need to know what other people are thinking and saying. And this is why, when I work with the Alito Foundation, we do the mentoring type thing. If you are that sort of white privileged person, it's not until you start listening to kids who are well educated, they went to Oxford, right? These are not kids that are coming in, life's not. These are people that have gone through the whole education system. They're the best of the best. And when these people from these white privileged backgrounds start talking to these young kids, and they listen to what they have to go through. And remember, I get away with a lot more because I'm of a lighter color. So I'm conscious of the fact these young black kids who tell these mentors what they have to go through, and they're in shock. They're like, "What, in England? That doesn't happen in England. What are you talking about?" And they're saying, "This happens all the time." But you get a thick skin about it. Or what people used to say is, "Oh, Gary's got a chip on his shoulder." I haven't got a chip on my shoulder. It's that I won't tolerate certain things, right? So to me, you've got to understand that until you're in those shoes, sometimes it's difficult to relate to it. So I think sometimes getting out of your comfort zone, it is prevalent in the UK. It's not, the UK is no different from America in a lot of ways. And I lived in America for a while, and the segregation out there is massive, right? It's not too long ago in the 60s, you're talking about segregation there. But I don't think UK is like this. It's all loving and it's more liberal and everything else. There are pockets in the UK that is very multicultural, right? When I lived in Chelsea, everyone's from different backgrounds, and there's Lebanese, there's Indian, there's Italian. Everyone was foreign, right? But as you move further out, right, when it's more majority white environment, you do experience it, and you're always going to be conscious of it, right? And sometimes I think, I'm not saying everyone's got to go out there and say, oh, it's we're to blame here, but I just think you've just got to be aware of what people go through, and that's not just a color thing; it's a gender thing. So if you're homosexual, or everyone experiences it in one way or another. I've just experienced it from someone of color, really.
You've mentioned quite a few things there, Gary, and I really appreciate your honesty, kind of, because it was quite a deep question. One of the themes that comes through as you speak is you talked about Alito, the importance of opening up those conversations between the mentor and the mentee with Alito. I mentor on the Alito program. I've found it myself. I've had a really great year mentoring. I will big it up. Anyone who's listening, who's interested in it, should absolutely go and find out more about the Alito Foundation, because it is a really, really good way to learn from young people with a load of potential, a load of great ideas. I'm mentoring a young entrepreneurial young lady at the moment. She is just full of ideas and really passionate. And actually, she's reminded me kind of just that the importance of maybe kind of like looking beyond now and having that belief that you can go off and do something, and not just kind of, oh, well, I'm in this safe job, or just really kind of, she's really following her passion. So I've really benefited from it myself. But that kind of proactively educating yourself and linking people up. We talked a little bit about role models before. Access to role models is actually incredibly important, isn't it, in terms of educating ourselves, educating others. And as a woman, it can sometimes be quite difficult to identify, like aspirational women to kind of role model. I'm lucky I've had them in the past. But it's not always that easy to kind of identify like amazing, inspiring role models. How important have role models in your life been? And if you had to kind of pick out one standout role model who's inspired you through your life or your career, who would that be?
Yeah, role models are so important. And I've said this again before, and I'll answer that question, but it's even simple things. As a young child, you're brought up as a girl, for example, you're brought up in this Disney world, right? And in Disney world, the role models, you're a princess, and you need to be saved by a prince all the time. And so the role models as a woman is like, okay, this prince is always going to save us. And so it wasn't until Frozen comes along, right? And you've got these strong role models. And I didn't name, my daughter's called Elsa. She was named before Frozen, right? But it's not until you start seeing these positive female role models that you can, hopefully these girls will stop thinking about, I need to wear pink and be saved by a prince. So I think role models subconsciously, again, as you're growing up, right, you think how important it is. And look, and I'm not a religious person, but it's simple things like if you're a white black person and everything you see, the role models that you see, or everything you study at school is all white European, and the only thing you talk about when it comes to black people is slavery, then you start thinking, well, what did we ever do, right? We don't talk about the Egyptians, the black Egyptians, right? So I find it really, all the films that are made, right? Everything is, Jesus is portrayed as a white person with blonde hair, blue eyes, yet he's brought up in the Middle East, right? So every single role model you see as you're growing up. So you hear stories, this is terrible, right? Where kids are trying to straighten their hair to look like their white friends, black people kids, or lightening their skin. Why, that's, because we all need to feel we're part of something. So because my dad's from Jamaica, and he was very much into sports. So when I was young, it was all about, he was my role model because I had a dad that was working hard, and he was, you always, boys look up to their dads, right? And my dad was effectively a role model, my first role model. But my dad's role models were sporting heroes. So it would be in cricket, it would be Viv Richards. In boxing, it was Muhammad Ali. So in civil rights movement, he would talk about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. It even talk about the challenges in Cuba, right? It educate about Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, right? So to me, it was always, my dad was always pushing about, I think he wasn't conscious about doing it. It's just these were people that he looked up to. So as a young kid, I'd look up to the same people. So I think my first role models were definitely in the sporting world, I'd say. Definitely related to cricket, which I loved, or boxing. So as you grow up, you start thinking about people that maybe look like my dad and make me feel. So I used to support the West Indies over England, for example, because of the environment. Because most of my friends I brought up were all black from Jamaican descent as well, right? So my whole environment was about seeing positive role models. So when you go into the working world and you don't see any role models, then I think you start thinking, wow. And I think if you look at why the Elito Foundation started, it started as the Power List. And what the Power List was, it was a publication that identified successful black people outside of music, sports. It was looking at black people in the business world that you can look up to and go, oh, there's a black CEO. There is a black lawyer. There is a black judge, And I don't think in UK, we don't push these role models enough for young kids to say, one day you can be. And I think Barack Obama was in America, so, oh, one day you can now be the president, right? And before, you could never say that to a young kid before. He's like, oh, no, you're never going to be a president this time. Now, all of a sudden, you think, well, I could be a senator. I can be a president one day. So I think we need to really bring to life female role models, black role models, right? It can't just be white role models that are in whole of society, right? Now, of course, we've got to study British history. We're in the UK, I get it. But there's other things that we can also bring to people's attention. And I think sometimes you just feel isolated and you don't feel part of it. And therefore, I think it excludes a lot of people. I think we need to reflect society a lot more than it actually is. Back in the mid-centuries, right? Middle Ages, sorry. The Middle East was far more advanced in the things that they were doing. They had libraries and they were cultured and things like that. And UK were living in some sort of dark ages. So we just don't show that. We just think we only see it through white European eyes, what the world consists of. And I don't think it's a true reflection. So I think the schooling system has a lot to answer for. We need more role models. And the role models can't just be the same ones that we keep rolling out, right? There's a lot more that we can be sharing. So I think it's so important to have role models. The amount of people that used to come up to me when I was at S3.
Really agree with you there.
Sorry, Natasha. The amount of people that used to come up to me at S3, right? I remember we had a Christmas do, and the amount of young black people used to come up to me and go, "Gary, I'm so proud of you." I was like, "Whoa!" It's just made me feel really uncomfortable, right? But when you see, I remember, there's 20, 30, 40 young black people, and all of them said the same. Will say more or less the same thing, because they like the idea that they can aspire in doing, and it makes you feel right. You've got to give back and try and help other people to say it can be achieved. I think it's important.
So you talk about feeling uncomfortable there, Gary, and I mentioned in the introduction that you were named Business Person of the Year at the Black British Business Awards. It's a really great honour, obviously, unquestionably. It comes with it an awful lot of responsibility, right, too. And being a role model isn't just being the face in the room. So what's your approach to developing other people and helping other people to realise their potential?
Look, people don't like to be put in that situation, right? Because we're humans and we all mess up, right? Any great leaders, they've got their faults, right? I'm not putting myself as a great leader, right? I think I've never really... When I used to see people or famous people, it didn't bother me, right? Because they're human beings. I think what we've got to try and do is just look at the positive sides of things and how we can help each other. And I think there's a lot of people who reach the top of their game and they're not looking to pull anyone else up the ladder, right? They're up there and they're so happy to be up there, they don't want to bring anyone else along on the journey. I think what we have to do when we get to a certain position, and this is not just race or gender, this is a class thing as well. I think the biggest obstacle we have in society is the class system. You look at the government that's in charge at the moment, and the amount of people that come from Eton that are on the front bench, the amount of, and you look at someone like Boris, right, and you go, oh my God, is that the best we can do? But we just seem to have this awe about these privileged few who lead us. So I just think we need to don't think anyone's better than you because of their social background or because they talk a certain way or they're educated a certain way. I see people, oh, I've got to go to Oxford or Cambridge, right? Or if they hear someone who talks a certain way, they think, oh my God, they're much brighter than us, right? I think you just got to look at yourself and say, look, we are all human beings. We can all achieve if we put our minds to something, but we do all need to help each other. And I think we're in a society where we don't help each other enough. We don't try and pull people up the ladder. We don't try and share our experiences and knowledge. When I ask for a certain amount of information from people, sometimes it's like, oh my God, why are we not trying to help each other? I'm not trying to take anything away from you. I'm just saying, how can we share some of our knowledge and our experience? And I think we need to do more of that. I think there's some really amazing people out there who do stuff for very little money, right? They do it for the greater good and we don't recognize them, right? And sometimes I look at what, the accolades that I've received. I'm a fraud compared to some of these people who are doing it at a level that you go, oh my God, they're not getting paid very well for doing it. They're putting their time and their efforts into it and they don't get the same recognition. So I just think we need to just be more of a society where we've got to out people who do things wrong, okay, but we don't crucify them. I think we have this we're in this society now at the moment. If anyone messes up, it's like, that's it, they're dead, right? And they could have done something 20 years ago, right? And they might have said something inappropriate, or the things that we did 20 years ago. If you put a film crew in recruitment 20 years ago, and the things that we used to say and do, we'd be embarrassed, right? But that doesn't. You can't then say, oh, society has changed. It's made us more woke, which is a good thing. But it's also to say, look, don't castrate, don't kill someone if they're trying to improve and evolve and do things better. And I think we're in a society at the moment that people are scared even to say certain things because it might be perceived as racist or sexist. So sometimes people mess up, right? They say the wrong things, but it's not malicious. But some people do it and it is, right? So they should be. But it's just finding the right balance. And I think we're in a society now that I think we're a lot more aware than we ever were before. My eyes have been open more in the last 5 years than the previous 25 years. But it doesn't mean I make mistakes. So I think it's hard to be a role model but you're also a human, right? You're going to mess up. You're going to do something wrong in your time, and don't judge someone just because they do mess up, but just make sure that if the person's trying to do good and trying to make things better, then judge them what their intentions are as much as anything as well. A friend of mine was really pulled through the press recently, and some people started calling this person like an Uncle Tom, and I'm thinking, this Uncle Tom, because he had an opinion or a view on something, and this person had done so much more in society to help people for black children to go to university, to get a job, and then to be labelled as an Uncle Tom is like, wow, that's just not appropriate. But because he did something that they didn't agree with, and I think people just then jump on the bandwagon, and that person just gets ruined. And I just think we've got to start being a bit more forgiving, but we also need to make sure we all start helping each other.
So a really interesting perspective. And actually, since we've started talking today, there's been a few times where you've come back to this idea of learning from mistakes, of allowing mistakes, accepting that failure happens along the journey. Do you think that that's a critical component, that kind of accepting that mistakes happen, accepting that sometimes you're going to fail, but actually, how do you react to those failures? How do you learn from those mistakes? That's one of the really critical ways to progress. Just thinking about people listening and kind of helping others to progress their lives. How important is that, do you think?
I've failed so many times at things, right? I've opened offices that have lost money. I've made the wrong strategic moves. I've had a lot of failures in what I've done. I've started businesses that have not gone anywhere. So to me, it's if you learn from those failures, like you said, right? And I remember when I was chief strategy officer, I opened offices in Brazil, India, Russia. And when I became CEO, I closed Brazil, Russia, and India because I made a mistake, right? It wasn't, we didn't, the market had changed, but also there were better markets and better locations to focus on. And I have to accept, I had to take it on the chin and made a mistake. So I think life is about making mistakes, but if you don't learn from them, then it's all a waste, right? You're going to keep making them. So to me, it's about, if you're going to push yourself and if you're going to stretch yourself and you're going to challenge yourself, you will make mistakes. It's not possible. But if you want to take it easy and be safe all the way, then you'll make less mistakes. But any successful businessman, any entrepreneur that you can speak to, they will tell you about the amount of mistakes they've made in order to become successful. And failure is part of everything, right? And it's how you deal with failure, I believe. It makes you resilient, makes you better. I think failing is part of your development. And if you don't go through life failing at anything, then you're living in a bubble. And I think we need to make mistakes in order to be better at what we do.
It's an important point as well, really, isn't it, in the whole conversation around how do we progress and advance diversity and inclusion in the workplace, I think, because I think whilst a lot of organisations, a lot of individuals are actually really keen on doing more to become more diverse, to create more inclusive and equal kind of working environments, there is still quite a big fear factor that I'm going to say the wrong thing, I might mess this up, I'm going to do the wrong thing. How do we remove that kind of fear, to open up the conversations, take that fear factor away that you've talked about a fair bit there, so that it makes it easier for organisations to actually just get started and start trying?
I just think you need to have, you need to educate people more, because they can't keep using that as an excuse, like, oh, that person, I didn't know. After a while, it just wears thin, right? I didn't know I shouldn't use that word or say that thing, or I didn't mean it. I think we've got to have a safe environment where, okay, let's have an environment where people can have an opinion. And I think you need to get people from different backgrounds in a room and say, look, I find that offensive, and then explain why. And I think unless you have an open dialogue with people from different backgrounds, then I don't think you're going to understand their point of view on things. So if you have an environment where you just sweep it under the carpet and say, look, just be careful what you say, then it just goes underground, right? Racism just goes underground. They just don't speak about it anymore. And if you don't speak about it, I don't think you get people to change, right? And I've seen it in many situations where I've seen racist parents whose daughters or sons are married someone from a different background, and it's like look at my grandparents, right? They kicked off. It's like, oh my god! And then once you get to know that person, that they are a human being and they do have similar values, it just so happens the color of their skin's slightly different, then they change, right? It takes time to change because you're set in your ways, right? And some people are set in their ways and will never change, right? And you've got to accept that. But there are some people who want to change but don't know how to change. And I think we just need to have an environment where people can talk, speak about things, might say the wrong things. And as long as they're saying it with the right intentions, say, look, this is how I feel. This is how I think. I don't think it's a sexist or racist environment. I don't think it's a homophobic, and you say, well, hold on, let me just tell you why and explain why. And then they might say, okay. And if they're aware of what people are seeing from a different perspective, I think then you'll start get change. If you don't have an open environment where people can talk, then it'll just go underground, right? People will say less, and it'll build up, and it'll become worse, I think. And I think we need to start thinking about how do we create that environment where people can speak their minds. Then we can go the other way, where you're so conscious of getting everyone's opinion on everything, you never get anything done, right? So you've got to get the right balance. And I think you've got to be careful that we just don't go completely crazy and say, look, we got to talk about everything before we do anything, right? I think you just got to get that balance right. And I haven't got the answer to it, because that's the difficult part.
So you've segued really nicely there into what I wanted to speak to you about next. You talk about, let's not talk so much that we don't act. And I don't know if you remember, but the first time you and I spoke was not long after the murder of George Floyd. And it was a time when there was a lot of talk in the media, and businesses around the world were releasing statements in support of Black Lives Matter. And, there was a real kind of sense of change and challenge. But you said something to me when we first spoke that stuck in my head, and it stuck with me actually. You talked to me about the inadequacy and meaningless of outrage unless it's backed up with action. You obviously believe, Gary, that businesses have a responsibility, an ethical responsibility, to move the needle, to help accelerate and get and overcome the institutionalised inequality and discrimination that still exists. So tell me about the Diversity and Inclusion Charter then. Why is it so important, do you think, for individuals, for organisations to make that public pledge to hold themselves accountable to what action they're going to take? Not just saying we believe in diversity and inclusion, it's a great idea, to actually hold themselves accountable. This year, we are going to do X, Y, Z.
Okay, so I'm involved with, there's a guy called Carl George who runs something called the Race Code, okay? And he's looked at all the data from all these different programs around diversity and inclusion. And we've looked at how we've evolved in the last 20 or 30 years in this particular area. And the data will show there's very little change, right, in relation to Black people at senior level. There's been the Parker report that was done, 5 years ago, about we need more people at this level, Black people at board level. Very little has changed, if anything, right? And it's all box ticking at the moment. And so something like the Race Code or Diversity Inclusion Charter is talking about, let's stop talking about it. Let's put practical solutions to it. So the Race Code will go to companies and say, if you're struggling to change and adapt, then we'll help you do that, right? We'll give you some guidelines and some training and some development. So that's saying to companies, look, if you don't know how to change, we'll help you. The diversity and inclusion, and I approach so many companies who go, this is a great idea to have a diversity and inclusion charter that publicly says, this is what I'm going to do. And then you have to back it up. And 90% of the people I'd said it's a great idea, take up's about 1%, because people they like the idea of changing, but they don't want to put it down and show what they're going to do different, because you know what? It's hard work, right? It's hard work. I need to make money. So I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing. I'll throw a few nuggets out there, and I might, I'll get a person of different color or, different gender, and I feel good about myself. But I don't really want to do it because it's difficult. It's not easy to sit down and say to your team, right, we need to look at a diverse form of candidates. We need to go into a different pool of people to look at. And we need to start thinking about how we interview people from that pool, because they're going to respond differently to interviews than someone from that pool. And people just go, do you know what? I've got to fill these jobs. I need to take someone on, and I haven't got the time. And it is because they got to hit their numbers. So I get it, right? So I've got to hit my budget. I've got to take 10 people on. And if I just go into the same pool of graduates from certain backgrounds who look a certain way, I know that if they come in, I can train them easily, because we can talk about the same things. We have the same similar backgrounds. They look like me, sound like me, went to similar things to me. So when we go out, we can socialize together, and it becomes an extension. If you then start bringing someone from a certain background who might be a Muslim and doesn't drink, they might think, God, we can't go out for a drink anymore, right? Or it might be a female who might not be into the sort of masculine thing or the male things. Or it might be someone who's gay, and you're thinking, geez, we can't crack our jokes anymore, So you just find yourself going, it's too much hard work. So I can understand why it's taking time to change. But I think if we get people to commit to it and you put it down in black and white, then I think you're accountable for it, then you're going to make a change, right? Or if you installed the race code, right? And if the race code said you as a PLC, unless you can demonstrate you followed the race code in that your bonuses will be impacted, I guarantee they'll pick up and raise their game and have an impact. So unless you're going to hit someone's pockets, right? Unless you're going to hit that, you're not going to get business because you haven't got a diversity and inclusion commitment, then they're not going to change. So what clients we're seeing now, certain clients want to see, what is your diversity and inclusion policies? And that's coming up on more and more tenders now. And then people are going to go, oh shit, I can't just say it anymore. I need to back it up. So the next phase is what you're going to do to back it up. And then the data's got to back it up. So we've seen it with women in the boards, right? We saw a big push on that, and we saw the data change considerably. But we've not seen a much change in colour because it's too difficult, or it's more complicated, right? And to me, unless we start exposing people and exposing companies, but giving them solutions to do it, which we are able to do now, then I don't think there's as many excuses as before. I've said this before, right? The problem you have, and I've been privy to it, right? So as a CEO of a business, I've got a chairman who comes in and we want to take on non-execs. The chairman has the relationships with the search companies, right? And these search companies have got him the job. So he feels obligated to go to the search company, who are white middle-class men, who got him a job as a chairman. He's obligated to go back to that search company and go, because they got him a job. And he might have other board jobs as well that they've got. So it's this little network that you've got. So you've got all these chairmen of boards who use the same 5 or 6 search companies, who are all white middle class with a few white females in there as well. So it's 95 plus, right? And they're going in their little pool of people who are also white middle class, mainly men. And then when you say, oh, can you give me a diverse pool of candidates? They go, there aren't any. Why isn't there any? Because you're only looking in your own little circle, your own, what you call your own black book full of white people, right? The irony, right? You've got a black book full of white people. And then you sit there and go, we don't get any diverse candidates coming through. And so we're in that situation where the search companies don't have to fish anywhere out. The chairmans don't go any further. So unless we go to those companies and say, right, let's create an independent board within the company and a PLC. The chairman doesn't decide what search company to use because he's got a conflict of interest here. This person got this, but got him a job. So let's have an independent board that says, do you know what? We decide what search companies we're going to use if we're going to find a non-exec. And we decide that the company that has to pitch to us has to demonstrate that they can deliver a diverse pool of candidates. If you'd started that at the top level with all the PLCs, that's a move in the right direction, and it can start filtering down. And I don't think, unless that changes, you're not going to see a significant change. I've got 10 years board experience, right? 10 years board experience, 6 years as a CEO. And I was never approached by one search company for a non-exec role. So what does that tell you, right? There's not many CEOs of a PLC that was of colour in the UK. I must be one of 5 at the time, if that. So to me, it's saying, you know what? It's not going to change unless it hits a company's pockets, or if clients say to companies, unless you can demonstrate what you're doing in this area, then nothing will happen. We had the same conversation with both parties, Tories and Conservative Party, about the race code, right? How do we make it? And they're like, yeah, great idea, but one of them said, and I won't say which government, say, well, we're basically saying we're long in race initiatives. We don't need any more. We've done, we've covered that enough. And we're saying, no, but you haven't done anything to make a change. What are you going to do that's going to practically make a change to a business, as opposed to, here's another report showing the inequality. Here's another report. Boris did it recently. Another report came out recently saying, oh, it's no institutional racism in the workplace. It's like, are you kidding me? Do you need another report? You really believe that? And then they're going to do another report to question that last report. We don't need any more reports, right? We need practical solutions. And I think companies need to be held accountable. And if they're held accountable and it affects their pockets, then they're going to make a change. Until that time happens, we're just going to see a lot of noise going on and very little happening.
It's a definition of insanity to keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, right? So do something differently, even if it's a small step, one small step followed by another small step. Eventually it will all add up. But if you keep doing the same thing, nothing's going to change. Gary, I've got one last question for you. If the tables were turned and you were the host today and you had your pick of anyone that you could get to talk about progression, who would be your dream guest to interview for their experiences and insights into progressing lives everywhere?
Whoa. That's a curveball you've just hit me with.
Oh, isn't it? It's my new question for series 2.
Do you know who I've listened to recently and I found really inspiring was, and I know I found Michelle Obama really inspiring in that if I look at her career as a lawyer and how she was successful in her own right, but even, and I know everyone says, oh, she was the first lady, right? But if I think about even as a first lady, the things she was trying to do around child poverty and making sure what you eat as much as anything, right? I think that I'm a vegan, right, quite recently, right? And I think of, if you look at people from disadvantaged backgrounds, I think the diet that people have as well, and the obesity that we have in the country as well, and the way all these fast foods throw crap at us, right? And I think that stimulates your brain as much as anything. But if I think about the things that she's quite strong about, she's got strong views about, how you got to help each other, how you got to make sure that people are doing things consciously about their body and what they're putting in their body. And I find, every time she talks, I find her really inspiring. I think she really sets the scene, and she's someone that you can relate to as well, because although despite all the success and what they've achieved, she still seems pretty grounded. So I find her pretty inspiring. So yeah, I'd say someone like her. Yeah.
Do you know what? I couldn't agree more. That would be 100%. And apparently my dog agrees. That would be my dream guest too. So we'll finish there in absolute agreement. Gary, thank you so much. It's been really fascinating to listen to you.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry if I know I'll go on a bit, and sometimes I go off at a tangent. But as you know, right, I'm pretty passionate about it. I do get somewhat. I'm not a pessimist, right? I think things will come good. I do think the younger generations will definitely change things. But I think the power still at the top. And unless the people who are in power are exposed and are educated to change, then things, it will take even longer. So I think we just need to start keeping that pressure. I think young people are doing that at the moment. But I think people that are in that privileged position, start thinking about what impact you can have. And the more we start getting people aware of what the challenges are, I think then the quicker we can make a change. And hopefully in 5 years, 10 years time, we're going to see significant changes. But we've not seen that much in 20 years, unfortunately.
Let's hope we can accelerate with the younger generation, as you say. I certainly share your optimism there, because I think that I think there will be the generation that will do it. Our kids will be the ones that move things forward. So. I certainly hope so. But don't apologise for the passion, Gary. Thank you very much.
No worries. Cheers.